Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to be looking at how AnnieRUOK performed at ARC's November meet. So AnnieRUOK is my beatleweight undercutter that we saw get built in the last video. Now, as a quick update for those of you who watched all the way to the end of that video, I ended up putting a 2S battery in Annie, which is less voltage than normal, but that is totally okay. Well, I mean, it was not the greatest idea I've ever had, but it was the easiest and quickest solution for the wiring harness inside, and I kind of ran out of time before dumping Annie into the arena, so 2S it was. Now, let's get on to the fight. So the first fight straight up was Lumberjack, which, if you've been watching my channel for a little while, Lumberjack is one of the fiercest beetles at ARC. It has the biggest weapon by far, or at least the weapon that's done the most damage by far. And yeah, it was a little bit brutal to be pulled up against this thing first up. Also, I should note that going into this match, I didn't have any drive ESCs at home, so I made my own 3 amp drive ESCs and jammed those into Annie as a bit of a test to see how well 3 amp ESCs drive a beetle around. So let's take a look at the Lumberjack fight. So that wasn't good. There's a couple of things that went wrong here. One, I forgot that I was fighting on 2S and I feathered the throttle up, which means I got the throttle to about halfway and left it there, which wasn't good because, of course, on 2S, at half stick, the weapon spins a lot slower than it should have, which was obviously a bad thing and meant that the first hit that I got on him was nothing-y, basically. If I had got a better hit on him, things might have been different, so from here on out, I realized that I need to just throw the throttle all the way up to the top and just leave it there whenever I'm spinning Annie's weapon up, because that's the only thing that's going to help in this case. And then what actually happened was that the homemade ESC that I was talking about, literally just before this fight, it burnt out, or I think it burnt out. I haven't actually had a chance yet to go through and look at what went wrong with it, but something went wrong with it and it stopped driving the wheels, which means I got counted out. So technically, the motors that I have in here should be okay on like a 3 amp ESC, but I don't know, something happened and they did not survive. So that wasn't very good at all. I then managed to beg and borrow and get some 10 amp ESCs from Steve. So thank you so much, Steve, because Steve managed to get Annie back into the arena by giving me those ESCs. And then I was up against Mr SANE, which is Jaden from Raptor Robotics. That's his beetle. So we fight in 2v2s together and then obviously go up against each other in beetles and A's every now and again. So this is his brand new beetle. He used to have Barry, which was a lifter. Now he just has a solid tank of a steel bot. So let's take a look at this fight. So that was really, really lucky. He basically, those prongs sticking out the back of his robot are literally for Annie. He measured out how far Annie's blade goes, and he made his spikes so that they would touch the front of Annie and the blade would not be touching him. And you could see that in this fight. It worked really well for him at the very start there. Then of course, my weapon stopped spinning. That was because I actually snapped the belt that was running the weapon. And after the weapon is snapped, obviously there's no way I can power the weapon anymore. So I ended up losing that. But he then got those points that were purely designed for Annie stuck into the wall, and he got them wedged right into a perfect corner of the actual pit door there. So it was a kind of 1 in a million shot that he made, and he got very, very unlucky and got himself caught in there and then couldn't free himself in time. So Annie did win that one, and that means Annie is at 1-1 for the competition, which isn't too bad, but it's also not great. So with that belt snapped, I did have a replacement belt, but I was offered an O-ring to try out in Annie because the belts that I have snapped a couple of times now, and they're just printed TPU. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I'm not quite sure why. So I took the O-ring and jammed that into Annie, and then Annie's very next fight is up against New Guy, which is another very tanky, mostly steel wedge beetle. So let's take a look at that. So in this fight, Annie's weapon didn't get spinning, as you could see, and I think I'm putting that down to the fact that the new O-ring that I had was just too tight and it actually got jammed inside my 3D printed pulleys. It kind of sat in there nicely, but I think when I actually kind of stretched it out to get it around the whole weapon assembly, what I've ended up doing is stretching it into the grooves too far in my weapon pulleys, and it's just got jammed and too tight and just stuck. Which wasn't very good at all, and obviously ended up with me being ringed out. However, I will say that Annie's drive is pretty decent. This is the best I've done with a Beetle's drive for a long time. This is, yeah, really, really good. I think it's because I'm using proper motors in Annie this time round. My last two Beetles have used kind of smaller, undersized motors, hoping to keep weight low, and Annie is running bigger motors with bigger gearboxes, and they seem to hold up pretty well. I mean, I lost one when I went to the States, and I don't know how or why that happened yet, but so far, these things have been holding up pretty well. So I think any Beetle that we build from now on is probably going to use these, unless, of course, there's something that we need to do. Like, unless there's like a real weight constraint, we'll probably just keep using these. So that fight wasn't good, and we lost that one, which was bad, but we had to basically turn around and go straight back into the arena against Choppy. Now, Choppy is, I think, actually the Beetle champion in ARC at the moment. It is a very large beetle made out of chopping boards, hence the name, and it basically has all of its good weight and everything into some really big wheels and some good motors to drive those wheels, and it's just been pushing everybody around. It's also got a nice big HDPE scoop at the front, made literally just by bending a chopping board into some standoffs, which, once again, that's how it gets its name. So I was going into this one, and I changed my weapon belt back to my 3D printed weapon belts, thinking that at least I would get a good shot on him. So let's see how that goes. And again, we had no weapon, and that was really bad in this fight. As I said, Choppy is really, really good at pushing people around. Annie had a little bit of an advantage though, because when Annie was scooped up in Choppy's chopping board, I still had the wheels on the ground, which meant that I could push back a little bit. That is not something that most people do. A lot of people have guarded wheels or have wedges out the back of their robots, which means that when Choppy scoops them up from the front, their wheels are off the ground, whereas Annie's wheels are on the ground right now, which means Annie could push back while in the scoop, which meant that that fight was a little bit more fair than, or like a little bit more like even than a lot of Choppy's other fights, but still it wasn't the greatest fight. Now, why did Annie's weapon not spin up? Well, that was literally just a wiring fault. I'll throw an image on the screen right now. One of the connectors disconnected at some point during something, and it might have actually been in the new guy fight as well. I don't know. Like I said, I think the O-ring was too tight, but it's very possible that this connector was disconnected as well during the new guy fight, and that could have cost me the weapon in both fights, which it sucks. That's just a horrible, horrible way to lose two fights by not having a weapon, is by having just unplugged. It's annoying and it's frustrating, and I don't know. Annie has so much potential, and Beetles. I suck at Beetles for some reason. I don't know what it is. My Beetles don't seem to work very well. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit. We've got one more fight to go for this event. So we'll talk about what's going to happen to Annie after we get through this fight. So the final fight is Death of Rats. Now, Death of Rats is another horizontal spinner, more high mounted than Annie's though, and also made by Steve, who gave me the ESCs, or lent me the ESCs, that are now currently sitting inside Annie. So let's take a look at that fight. So the weapon spun! It actually spun! That was good. But of course, we lost the weapon belt again. I also found out during this last fight, the weapon mount seems to have moved a little bit, because it was riding low on the front here, like it was scraping the ground along the front of the weapon bar, and it was also actually hitting the weapon pulley, which means that instead of sitting flat like this, it's sitting angled like this. So it's low at the front where it touches the ground, and then it's high at the back where it's touching the weapon pulley. None of these things are good. So yeah, Annie's probably going to need just a huge overhaul. Obviously, we lost that fight, we lost our weapon belt, they lost their weapon belt, and then it became a pushing match, and I got a little bit overzealous on the trying to push him down the pit thing and went down myself. That's just the way this goes sometimes. So Annie did not do very well at all. That's a 1 out of 5 record. That's pretty bad overall. We can do a lot better than this. Annie has potential. You and I have seen this potential. She can hit hard when she actually gets spinning, and when she does hit. So we just need to draw that out of her. So how we're going to do that, it's basically just an overhaul. We now need to go to Annie version 2. Annie is basically at version like 1.3 or something at this point, or 1.2, I don't know. She's basically had relatively similar chassis designs the entire 3 sets of fights that she's fought in, and none of them have worked particularly well. So there's going to be a new chassis design. I'm thinking we're going to shrink in a little bit, which is going to give us a little bit more weight to play with. We're also going to change the drive motors for a brushless drive using the same gearboxes, but different motors into those gearboxes. I think we're going to mount the brushless motor differently, because at the moment it's mounted to the top plate, which makes taking Annie apart really, really difficult. And we're going to change the belt system as well. So as I said, this belt system is giving me all sorts of troubles. So we can't keep doing that. We need to do something different, and do something different that we're going to do is going to be changing this belt system over. I think we're going to go over to the similar type of belt that they use to run RC cars, I think, because those should be a little bit better and provide a little bit more power output for Annie, which will be good. Yeah, all of that stuff will be in a future video though, and probably closer towards the new year, I would say. We've got a bit of time, so I'm going to get to some design work, redesign Annie from the ground up, and we'll see how we go from there. Yeah, so on the whole, not a great showing for Annie, but as I said, we have a plan moving forwards. We have new things that we can try and new things that we can do. So despite the fact that those flights weren't all that great for me, I hope you guys enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.